I discovered the first tape by accident, buried in the attic of the old Victorian house I inherited from my late uncle. The house, an unsettling labyrinth of dusty hallways and forgotten rooms, seemed alive with whispers of the past. Among the cobwebs and old trunks, a plain, unlabeled VHS tape lay hidden under a stack of moldy books. Intrigued and slightly unnerved, I wiped off the dust and connected an ancient VHS player to a decrepit TV I found in the corner. The screen flickered to life, revealing a man shrouded in darkness. His face was mostly hidden by a hood, but his eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating intensity. "Hello there," he began, his voice a low, menacing growl. "You don't know me, but I know you. My name doesn't matter. What matters is the game we're about to play." He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes seeming to pierce through the screen. "I've left a series of tapes, each one containing clues. These clues will lead you to my next victim. Your challenge is to find them before I do. Fail, and they die." The screen went black, leaving an oppressive silence. I tried to convince myself it was some elaborate prank, but the fear gnawing at my gut said otherwise. I ejected the tape, my hands trembling, and found a small note tucked in the box it came from. The handwriting was hurried, almost desperate. "Go to the basement." I had always avoided the basement of my uncle's house. It was a claustrophobic space filled with a damp, musty smell that clung to the walls like a malignant force. But I had no choice. I had to see this through. The basement stairs creaked under my weight, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The dim light revealed a clutter of old furniture, broken appliances, and thick cobwebs. In the corner I found another tape labeled Tape 2. I raced back upstairs, heart pounding, and played the second tape. The same hooded figure appeared, his voice dripping with malice. "Well done. You found the second tape. Now, for your first clue, the place where children laugh and play, but now their joy has gone away. Find the swings, the slide, and the sand, where once happy children, now only shadows stand." The screen went black again, but the chill remained. I knew exactly where he meant. The old playground, abandoned for years, was a local haunt for urban explorers and the occasional delinquent. Determined, I grabbed my coat and keys, my mind racing with the urgency of the hunt. The drive to the playground was filled with a sense of impending dread. The playground, a decaying relic of happier times, stood eerily still under the moonlight. I parked and approached cautiously, my flashlight casting long, sinister shadows on the rusted swings and slide. In the sandpit, half buried under a mound of dead leaves, I found the third tape. As I bent down to pick it up, I heard a soft, mocking laugh behind me. I whipped around, heart in my throat, but saw nothing except the empty playground. I sped back to the house, fear propelling me forward. Who was this person? Why had he chosen me? And could I stop him before he struck again? Back in the living room, I inserted the third tape. The man's face filled the screen once more, his eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure. "Congratulations," he said, his voice oozing with mock admiration. "You found the third tape. But don't get too confident. The next clue will test your resolve, your courage, and your sanity. Are you ready to play?" As the third tape whirred to life, my nerves were on edge. The killer's taunting eyes stared back at me through the screen. "Bravo," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've made it this far. But the real challenge begins now." He paused, leaning closer to the camera, and whispered, "The next clue lies where the forgotten rest. Seek the tombstone that casts no shadow." The screen went black, leaving me with a gnawing sense of urgency. A graveyard. It had to be. My mind raced, picturing the local cemetery, a place I had always found unsettling even in daylight. Now I had to venture there at night, alone, in search of a shadowless tombstone. I grabbed a flashlight and a coat, bracing myself for the chilling night ahead. As I drove through the darkened streets, the familiar town seemed foreign, its quietness now filled with foreboding. The cemetery gates loomed ahead, their iron bars twisted and rusting. I parked my car and approached the entrance, the flashlight's beam cutting through the thick darkness. The cold air bit at my skin as I stepped inside, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound in the eerie silence. Rows of tombstones stretched out before me, their inscriptions barely visible in the dim light. I moved slowly, the beam of my flashlight sweeping over each one, searching for something, anything that stood out. My breath formed misty clouds in the frigid air, the only warmth in this place of death. Suddenly, my light fell on a peculiar tombstone. Unlike the others, it was pristine, almost glowing under the moonlight, yet cast no shadow. My heart raced as I approached it, The name etched on the stone sending a chill down my spine, Eleanor Graves. At the base of the tombstone, partially buried in the dirt, was another tape. I reached down, my fingers numb from the cold, and unearthed it. As I did, a whisper of wind seemed to carry a faint mocking laugh through the cemetery. I spun around but saw nothing but the silent graves. Back at the house, I wasted no time in playing the tape. The killer's face appeared again, his eyes gleaming with sadistic delight. "Impressive," he purred. "You found Eleanor. Now let's see how you handle this. The next clue lies where the living go to meet the dead. Seek the guardian who never sleeps." The screen went black, but his words echoed in my mind. A place where the living go to meet the dead. A morgue. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The old county morgue was just a few miles away, a place of cold steel and sterile sorrow. Determined, I set off again, the fear now a constant companion. The morgue stood at the edge of town, a stark, unfeeling building surrounded by an iron fence. I parked nearby and approached with trepidation, the flashlight barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and decay. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of refrigeration units. I moved cautiously through the dimly lit corridors, each step echoing off the tiled walls. In the main examination room, I found what I was looking for, a life-size statue of an angel, its eyes forever open, standing watch over the room. At its feet, another tape waited. I picked it up, the sense of being watched stronger than ever. Back home, I inserted the tape, my hands shaking. The killer's face filled the screen once more, his eyes now blazing with malicious glee. "You're doing well," he said, his voice a chilling caress. "But the game is far from over. The next clue will test your limits. Are you ready for the final round?" The screen went black, leaving me with a mix of dread and determination. I knew I had to see this through, no matter the cost. The lives of the killer's future victims depended on it. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. This twisted game was far from over, and the killer's next move was a mystery I had to solve before it was too late. The next morning, I woke with a start, still haunted by the events of the previous night. The killer's words echoed in my mind. "The next clue will test your limits." I knew I couldn't stop now, not with lives at stake. I brewed a strong cup of coffee, trying to steady my nerves, and sat down to review the tapes once more. The killer's smug face taunted me, but I had to focus. He said the next clue was where the living meet the dead. I had already found the tape at the morgue, so what could be next? An idea struck me: the funeral home. It was the only other place in town that fit the description. I grabbed my coat and keys, steeling myself for what I might find. The funeral home stood on the outskirts of town, an imposing Victorian building that always seemed to loom over the landscape. I parked and approached the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The front door was locked, as expected, but a side window was slightly ajar. I slipped inside, the air thick with the scent of lilies and formaldehyde. The dimly lit interior was silent, save for the faint hum of a refrigeration unit somewhere in the back. I moved cautiously, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Room after room, each more eerie than the last, yielded nothing. Finally, in the viewing room, I saw something that made my blood run cold: a coffin, partially open, with a tape placed neatly on top. I hesitated, my mind racing. Was this a trap? I had no choice but to find out. I picked up the tape and left as quickly as I could, the oppressive silence following me out the door. Back at home, I played the tape, bracing myself for whatever horror awaited. The killer's face appeared, his eyes glittering with cruel amusement. "Welcome back," he sneered. "You're getting closer. The next clue is where love is lost and memories fade. Find the place where hearts go to die." The screen went black again, but the riddle lingered in my mind. Where love is lost and memories fade. It had to be the old abandoned asylum on the edge of town, a place known for its tragic history and eerie atmosphere. I arrived at the asylum just as the sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows over the decaying building. The gates creaked as I pushed them open, the air thick with the scent of rot and mildew. The asylum loomed ahead, its windows like dark, soulless eyes watching my every move. Inside, the atmosphere was even more oppressive. Peeling paint, broken furniture, and scattered debris created a labyrinthine nightmare. I navigated the dark hallways, each step echoing in the stillness. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced on the walls. In the heart of the asylum, I found a room filled with old patient files and photographs. Amid the chaos, a small box stood out. I opened it with trembling hands and found another tape inside, wrapped in a yellowed piece of paper. The paper had a single word scrawled on it, "Hurry." I raced back home, heart pounding, and played the tape. The killer's face appeared, his expression more malevolent than ever. "You're quite the detective," he mocked, "but time is running out. The final clue awaits, and it's closer than you think. The answer lies within the place where you began. Look in the mirror, and you'll see what you need." The screen went black for the final time. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of his words. The place where I began my uncle's house. The mirror. I rushed to the bathroom, my heart hammering in my chest. The mirror reflected my anxious face, but there was nothing unusual about it. Then, a glint caught my eye. A small, barely noticeable seam at the edge of the mirror. I pried it open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, I found one last tape, along with a note. "You've done well," the note read, "but the game isn't over yet. Watch the tape and all will be revealed." I inserted the tape into the player, my hands shaking. The killer's face appeared, a sickening grin stretching across his face. "Congratulations," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You found the final tape, but your journey is far from over. The final location is where dreams turn to nightmares, where hope is lost. It's a place you know all too well. Find it and maybe, just maybe, you'll stop me." The screen went black, leaving me with a single terrifying thought: the final showdown was approaching, and the stakes had never been higher. I had to find this place of nightmares, and I had to do it before the killer claimed his next victim. Time was running out. The final tape's message echoed in my mind: where dreams turn to nightmares, where hope is lost. My thoughts raced as I tried to decipher the killer's cryptic clue. There was only one place that fit the description: the old abandoned amusement park on the outskirts of town. It had once been a place of joy, but after years of neglect and a tragic accident, it had become a local legend of horror. I grabbed my coat and flashlight, the familiar weight of fear settling over me as I headed out. The drive to the amusement park felt interminable, each mile stretching my nerves taut. When I finally arrived, the entrance loomed before me, rusted gates creaking in the wind, the once vibrant sign now faded and broken. The park was a graveyard of shattered dreams. Rusted rides, broken attractions, and dilapidated buildings stood as eerie monuments to the past. The air was thick with the scent of decay and abandonment, the silence oppressive. I stepped through the gates, my flashlight flickering as it cut through the darkness. The killer's game had led me here, and I knew I was getting close. I moved cautiously, every creak and groan of the old park setting my nerves on edge. The roller coaster tracks twisted above me like a skeletal serpent, leading to the remains of the funhouse. Its once brightly painted facade was now a haunting visage of chipped paint and broken windows. I approached, the darkness inside seeming to pulse with a life of its own. Inside the funhouse, the maze of warped mirrors and eerie corridors was disorienting. My reflection twisted and distorted, creating a nightmarish labyrinth. I moved slowly, my breath echoing in the confined space. Then, in a corner room filled with cracked mirrors, I saw a chair with a tape recorder on the seat. I approached cautiously, my reflection a thousand shattered versions of myself. I pressed play on the recorder, the killer's voice crackling to life. "Welcome to the endgame," he said, his voice a malevolent whisper. "You've done well to make it this far, but this is where it gets interesting. The final clue is simple. Find the place where the ride never ends. Hurry, the clock is ticking." The message sent a jolt of fear through me. I knew exactly where to go: the carousel. It was the centerpiece of the park, a once beautiful ride now frozen in time, its horses cracked and weathered. I ran through the park, the shadows closing in around me. The carousel loomed ahead, its ornate structure casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. I climbed onto the platform, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. In the center, where the mechanisms used to be, I found a small box. Inside the box was a final tape and a map. I played the tape, my heart pounding. "Time's up," the killer's voice taunted. "The final location is marked on the map. If you want to save them, you'll have to hurry. Good luck." I unfolded the map, my eyes scanning the layout. The marked location was a cabin deep in the woods, a place I recognized from childhood camping trips. My stomach churned with dread, but I had no choice. I had to finish this. The drive to the cabin was a blur of anxiety and determination. The road wound through dense forest, the trees closing in like skeletal fingers. When I finally arrived, the cabin stood eerily silent, its windows dark and unwelcoming. I approached cautiously, flashlight in hand. The door creaked open, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. In the center of the room was a chair, and tied to it was a terrified woman. Her eyes widened as she saw me, muffled cries escaping from behind the gag. I rushed to her, frantically untying the ropes. As I worked, the killer's voice crackled through a hidden speaker. "Congratulations," he said, his tone mocking. "You found her, but this isn't over. The true test is about to begin." The woman was free, but before I could react, a figure emerged from the shadows. The killer, dressed in black, moved with terrifying speed. We struggled, the room spinning as we fought. His strength was overwhelming, his eyes cold and merciless. In a desperate move, I grabbed a nearby lamp and smashed it over his head. He staggered, giving me just enough time to grab the woman and run. We burst out of the cabin, the cold night air hitting us like a wall. We didn't stop running until we reached my car. As we sped away, the woman sobbed in relief, and I felt a mixture of triumph and lingering dread. The killer was still out there, his game unfinished, but for now, we were safe. Back at the house, I sat down, exhausted but resolute. The killer had challenged me, but I had saved her. The game was far from over, but I was ready for whatever came next. The woman, Sarah, sat trembling in my living room, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. I handed her a cup of tea, trying to offer some semblance of comfort in the midst of the chaos. Her hand shook as she took it, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said, her eyes reflecting a deep, haunting terror. "I thought I was going to die in that cabin." "We're not out of danger yet," I replied, my mind racing with thoughts of the killer still lurking out there. "We need to contact the police and let them handle this." I dialed 911 and explained the situation to the operator, providing as much detail as I could. The police arrived swiftly, their presence bringing a brief sense of security. They took Sarah's statement and began their investigation, combing through the cabin and surrounding area for any clues that might lead them to the killer. As the hours passed, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me feeling drained and anxious. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The killer had orchestrated everything with meticulous precision, and I doubted he would be so easily caught. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to piece together any details that might have escaped me. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Miss me?" it read. My blood ran cold. The killer was still out there, still watching, still playing his twisted game. I immediately called the police, but by the time they traced the number, it was too late. The phone was a disposable burner, untraceable. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation seemed to stall. Sarah was placed under protective custody, but the killer's taunting messages continued, each one more chilling than the last. He was always one step ahead, slipping through the cracks like a shadow. One evening, as I sat in my living room, another text came through. "Ready for the final round?" Attached was a photo of a location I recognized all too well, my childhood home. It had been abandoned for years, left to rot after my parents passed away. The killer was drawing me back to where it all began. I knew I had to go. This was the final showdown, the culmination of his twisted game. I grabbed my flashlight, a knife for protection, and headed out into the night. The drive to my old home was filled with a heavy sense of dread and anticipation. The house loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, its windows like empty eyes watching my approach. I stepped inside, the air thick with dust and memories. The flashlight cast long shadows across the decaying walls, each creak of the floorboards echoing through the silent house. I moved cautiously, every nerve on edge. In the living room, I found a chair positioned in the center, just like in the cabin. Taped to the back of the chair was another note. "Sit." I hesitated, fear clawing at my insides, but I knew I had no choice. I sat down, my flashlight casting a dim glow around the room. A hidden speaker crackled to life, and the killer's voice filled the air. "Welcome home," he said, his tone dripping with sinister delight. "You've done well to make it this far, but now it's time for the final game." The room plunged into darkness, the flashlight flickering and then going out completely. I was left in pitch blackness, the sound of my own breathing loud in the silence. "Find me," the voice whispered, coming from all around me, "or she dies." A light flickered on, revealing a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. I moved towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. The door led to the basement, a place I had always dreaded as a child. I descended the stairs, each step taking me deeper into the darkness. At the bottom, a single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a weak, flickering light. In the center of the room was a table, and on it another tape. I played it, the killer's face appearing on the screen, his eyes glinting with malevolent pleasure. "You're close," he said, "but can you save her?" A second light flickered on, revealing Sarah, tied to a chair in the corner of the room. Her eyes were wide with fear, her mouth gagged. I rushed to her, frantically untying the ropes. Before I could free her completely, the killer stepped out of the shadows, a knife gleaming in his hand. "Not so fast," he snarled. We struggled, the confined space making every movement a desperate dance for survival. He slashed at me, the blade grazing my arm, but I managed to knock it from his hand. With a final desperate surge of strength, I tackled him to the ground, pinning him down. The police arrived moments later, bursting through the door and pulling the killer away. Sarah was safe, and the nightmare was finally over. As the police led the killer away, he turned to me, a twisted smile on his face. "This isn't the end," he whispered. "There will always be another game." But for now it was over. Sarah and I were safe, and the killer was behind bars. The ordeal had left scars, both physical and emotional, but we had survived. As we walked out of the house into the dawn light, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The game was over, but I knew I would always carry the memory of those tapes and the killer's haunting eyes.